Hey everybody, this is Matt Perez and welcome to video 2 in our animation series. In the last video we talked a little bit about what we're doing here and we created this 3D sketch that will define the distance and path that our machine is actually going. So that's the hardest step right there. Now a lot of it that we need to do just comes down to details. One thing that I want to change is I want to go back into the pathmate and I want to show you some of the options you have. So when we're defining the movement inside an animation, we need to give it some very detailed, some very structured numbers and movements. When you're dealing with mates, you're going to be suppressing and unsuppressing them. When you're dealing with distance mates or angle mates, you're going to give it an angle range. For instance, if you say that the base can go from 0 degrees to 30 degrees, it's going to do that, and you're going to be able to interpolate between those 2 points. When we're dealing with a path mate, in our assembly it's good to have it free because we can manually drag it around and we can make sure that that motion is correct. But inside of an animation, we can't have a free path constraint. It's not going to allow us to manually drag that around and update. It's just not going to work. So what we need to do is either select distance or percentage along path. So for me, I'm just going to select distance along path and I'm going to leave this at 0 for now. So now that we have that little piece of information taken care of, we want to make sure that our assembly is in the center of our view. We want to make sure that once we get into a motion study, we don't have to move things around because that's going to mess up with our view creation. Basically, whatever you see on the screen now, that's where the starting point of your animation is going to be. So now that we've done that, we can go to Tools, Add-ins, and we can make sure that we have SOLIDWORKS Motion turned on. And then I'm going to right-click on Motion Study 1, and I'm going to create a new motion study. This allows me to start blank and to start fresh. Now if we scroll all the way up to the top of this orientation and camera views, this is the area that will allow you to either add or not add any rotation to your view. So right now if you right click, disable view key creation is depressed here. So that means that I can rotate this model around, but this view that we see, this is going to be the view for our animation. We're not going to be able to zoom in. We're not going to be able to use a camera and rotate around or do anything like that, which is good for us. We don't want to focus on any of the additional aspects of an animation. We just want to focus on this motion that we're dealing with here. Alright, so I want to take the timeline and drag it to 4 seconds, and I'm going to take this key point and simply drag it out to 4 seconds. So I've created a 4-second long animation. At that 4-second point, I'm going to go down to my pathmate, and you'll notice that the pathmate actually has a sub path that's listed, and if you right click on that, you have an edit dimensions option. So in my case, I'm going to edit this dimension from 0 to be 4.9 inches. So if I calculate that, for whatever reason, I don't know if it has to do with the recording software that we're using or just an issue that in this version of SOLIDWORKS that I'm dealing with, it's not showing the animation when we calculate it. But if I manually drag this around, we're going to be able to see the motion just fine. So let's play it from the beginning. And you notice that nothing happens on the screen, but if we look at our dimensions, we're 4.9 inches along the path here. And if we go back to our 0 point and we look at the dimensions, we're at 0 inches there. So everything is set properly within our animation. So we know that we've done all the work right and everything's working fine. We're just going to rebuild that and manually drag this around to take a look at the motion. So as I said, for whatever reason when we play it, it's not showing it properly, but as we manually drag this around, we can see that the motion is right. Now one thing that you do want to do whenever you're creating this motion, you want to right click on the second point and take a look at the interpolation mode. So we have some options. We have linear, snap, ease in, ease out, and the option to do ease in and ease out. So I'm going to select the ease in, ease out option, and I'm going to recalculate this. So especially when you're dealing with a free drag, in this case we have the path that we're dealing with, but when you're dealing with a free drag, you want to make sure that you understand how that motion is going to be handled. So you can see now that once we did the ease in, ease out, that the motion looks a little bit smoother. It's not snapping back to that initial point all the time. So at this 4-second point, we have our key point. What we want to do is we want to create a new key point that's a little bit farther out, and at that point in time, we want to look at some of our mates. So what we want to do is we want to close our jaws. So I'm going to suppress the open jaws, and I want to unsuppress the closed jaws. So you can see at that point, we've now closed the jaws. And as we get to this point, you can see they snap shut. So a few other things that we need to do here as well is we need to make sure that the part we're trying to pick up here is free. So at this point as well, this key point, we want to remove this initial position. So we're going to suppress the initial position. We're going to suppress the plug top plane. And we want to unsuppress the plug concentric. And we want to unsuppress the plug coincident. So right now the plug is free to move with the jaws of our part. So we're going to drag this out another couple seconds, out to 8 seconds. I'm going to drag the entire timeline out to 8 seconds. And at the 8-second mark, we're going to modify the dimension of our path. So in this case, we want to go all the way to the end of the path. Now, I believe it's something like 15.5 inches or so. I don't know the actual dimension, so I'm going to just go out all the way as far as this will go. Now, you do also have the option to do a percentage of the path. So out at this point, we are going to edit the dimension again, and let's rebuild that. So you can see it actually went a little bit too far because we went past that dimension. So I'm going to modify this, and I believe it was somewhere around the 15 mark. And I'm going to edit the dimension and rebuild. So you can see that some funky things are happening here because no solution is found for this. So let's drag this point back and see where the problem happened. So it looks like our 3D curve at some point got messed up. And the reason it got messed up is because the center point of our curve is actually on this part. Now, if you remember initially when we drew that curve, we snapped it to the center of our part, but then we went back and we undid that relation. We didn't undo it with this point, so as soon as we dragged it on, so we picked it up and we dragged it on, we had all kinds of issues here. So what I want to do is I want to go back to my model, and I want to go back to that 3D sketch. So I'm going to edit the 3D sketch, and I'm going to go to this point, and I'm going to remove any relation, any coincident relation with my part, and then I'm going to fix it. So now if I exit the sketch, I'm going to go back into my motion study, and I'm going to recalculate it. We're just going to let this run, and then we're going to make sure that that point stayed where it needed. And this is why it's so important that when you start creating these paths and you start creating any of these relations, that you don't simply just snap to geometry, because that can get you in a lot of trouble. So here's a good example. We're just going to drag it along. The robot arm starts at the back, it gets almost 5 inches down. It grabs that piece. So remember, at this point, we're suppressing any relations that held it in place, and we snap the jaws shut, and it rotates around. Now, one thing you'll notice is our path is actually rotating through the foot of our part. So this means that we're going to have to modify our path, maybe add another point and bring it up. It's easy enough to do, so we can go back and do that after the animation is done. It's going to drag it over and get to the end of our curve, but you'll notice that we're not quite to the end of the curve. So I want to edit the dimension, and I'm going to take it out to 17.5. And remember, anytime you do this, you edit this dimension, you want to rebuild it on the spot. You can see we're close, but we're not quite all the way there. So I'm going to go to 18.7, rebuild it, and let's go to 19.3, and you notice that it comes back. So it's definitely in there. It's important to know the distance of your part, and I believe it's 19.3 is where it hopped back. And you'll notice that 19.1 is where it keeps coming to. So we can leave it at 19.1, but you'll notice that we're not quite there yet. So let's go back to 18.8, rebuild it, and see where that puts us. 18.7, we'll go to 18.3, and it comes back again. So 18.7, we'll leave it at that. So now that we're at this point in our animation, what do we have to do? Well, we need to open the jaws, and we need to undo some of these relations here. So what we'd like to do is, again, drag this timeline out a little bit because we want it to stall there for a second. And at this point, we're going to open the jaws. So we want to suppress the closed jaws. We want to unsuppress the open jaws. So at this point it's open. We want to unsuppress the concentric, unsuppress the coincident, and then we also have a plug and socket concentric. So we want to make sure that these are okay, and it's saying it's unsuppressed, but we want to make sure that we unsuppress this one. So it pops it into place, and then we're going to go 1 split second later, and we want to unsuppress this plug top plane coincident. That's going to pop into place. So now let's recalculate this whole thing. And again, for whatever reason, the preview is not able to play here. And I believe it's because of the screen capture. But once we recalculate everything, we can go ahead and manually drag the timeline through. And you can see the robot's moving, gets to this point, the jaws close, it picks up our piece, and we're moving along. You can see we drag it all the way to the end and drop it into place. So that is a nutshell on how to do the motion here, and we're going to cover all the final wrap-ups in the next video. So as always, if you guys have any questions, please email SOLIDWORKS support at mlc-cad.com, and we'll see you next time.